The Lucky Spur saloon, usually a raucous crucible of ambition and desperation, felt oddly hushed as the Dakota blizzard intensified. Wind, a mournful banshee, shrieked through the cracks in the walls, pelting the frosted windows with handfuls of icy grit. Inside, the air hung heavy, a pungent blend of stale whiskey, cold pipe smoke, and the faint, lingering scent of unwashed bodies. Eleanor Vance, her slender frame a deceptive cover for the resilience forged in a life far from this piano bench, sat hunched over the worn, upright instrument. Her fingers, long and remarkably agile despite the biting cold that seeped into the saloon from all sides, worked their magic, extracting a lively if somewhat reedy jig from the yellowed keys. It was a tune as familiar to the regulars of Redemption Creek as the creak of their own boots, a staple of Eleanor's nightly repertoire for the better part of 5 years. But this particular midnight felt different, imbued with an unspoken tension that pricked at Eleanor's senses. The saloon, which had buzzed with boisterous card games and slurred boasts just hours before, was now largely deserted. The last few cowboys, their faces ruddy from drink and the cold, had long since stumbled out into the swirling white chaos, their drunken hollers swallowed by the storm. Only Silas, the saloon's proprietor, a man whose face was a roadmap of forgotten brawls and hard-won wisdom, remained behind the bar, meticulously wiping down its scarred surface with a rag that had seen better days. In the far corner, hunched over a half-empty glass of amber liquid, sat Calhoun, a man whose permanent scowl and quick temper were as well known as his propensity for trouble. He was a man most folks preferred to keep their distance from, especially when he was steeped in whiskey and silence. Eleanor's usual repertoire, a collection of popular ditties and lively dance tunes, felt utterly inadequate tonight. A strange current, cold and insistent, ran through her veins, a feeling less of premonition and more of a deeply buried memory stirring. Her gaze drifted involuntarily to the heavy saloon doors, braced against the relentless assault of the wind. Each gust was a low growl, a sound that resonated with a distant, almost primal echo within her. Without conscious thought, without even truly deciding to, her fingers strayed from the familiar jig. The tempo softened, the melody slowed, and a different kind of music began to unfurl, hesitant at first, then growing in confidence. It was a tune unlike any heard in these parts, a sequence of notes that seemed to stretch into the vast, empty expanse of the prairie, punctuated by minor chords that whispered of ancient sorrows and an indomitable spirit. It was a Comanche melody, a haunting lullaby her Comanche foster mother had sung to her in the quiet of a teepee under a sky ablaze with stars. It was a part of her past, a segment of her life she had painstakingly buried, believing it secured away, a secret in a world that distrusted and reviled all things Indian. She hadn't played it in years, perhaps not since she'd fled the plains after a brutal raid, seeking anonymity and a new identity in the burgeoning, chaotic towns of the frontier. Silas Midwipe paused. The rag hung suspended in his calloused hand, his head cocked, a deep furrow appearing between his grizzled brows. Even Calhoun, usually impervious to anything beyond the rim of his glass, shifted, a faint, almost imperceptible scrape of his chair against the rough-hewn floorboards. Eleanor, utterly lost in the intricate emotional tapestry of the music, felt a profound sense of release. Each note that flowed from her fingertips was a whisper from a life she had deliberately chosen to abandon, yet one that continued to pulse with an undeniable vitality beneath the polished veneer of her carefully constructed present. Then, a subtle creak, barely audible above the storm's sustained fury. The saloon doors, thick and heavy, shuddered inward just enough to admit a slicing gust of icy air. It carried with it the sharp, clean scent of pine, of damp earth and something else, something wild, untamed, the raw essence of the winter wilderness itself. Eleanor's hands faltered for a mere fraction of a second, her heart seizing in her chest, but she continued, her eyes fixed on the keys, unwilling, almost unable to break the potent spell she had woven. A figure materialized from the maelstrom of white, a stark silhouette against the swirling chaos outside. Tall, lean, and cloaked in a heavy fringed buffalo hide that seemed to blend seamlessly with the howling storm, it was unmistakably a Native American warrior. His face, partially obscured by the deep hood of his robe, was etched with the harsh, undeniable lines of a life lived exposed to the elements. He moved with a quiet, almost spectral dignity, his moccasined feet making no sound whatsoever on the worn wooden floor. Silas, usually quick to challenge any non-white individual daring to enter his establishment after hours, remained utterly frozen, the rag forgotten in his hand, his mouth slightly agape. Even Calhoun, known for his instant venomous hostility towards any savage, remained unnervingly still, his eyes wide and fixed. The warrior's gaze, dark and piercing, found Eleanor at the piano. There was no aggression in his eyes, no challenge, no hostility, only an intense, almost profound recognition that seemed to strip away the years and the carefully constructed defenses around her. He walked slowly, deliberately, towards the piano, his presence filling the otherwise empty space of the saloon, making it seem smaller, more intimate, yet also infused with a strange, undeniable power. Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, wild drum beating a counter-rhythm to the relentless roar of the blizzard outside. She kept playing, the Comanche melody flowing from her fingertips, a fragile but potent bridge between two disparate worlds. He stopped directly in front of the piano, close enough for her to feel the chill emanating from his buffalo hide, his eyes never leaving hers. A beat passed, heavy and silent, then another. The only sounds in the room were the haunting, unfamiliar melody, the persistent, savage howl of the wind outside, and the frantic thrumming of Eleanor's own blood in her ears. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement that held an almost ritualistic grace, the warrior reached into a small pouch at his belt. Eleanor's breath hitched, a primal, ancient fear tightening her chest, readying her for an assault, but he did not draw a weapon. Instead, he pulled out a small, intricately beaded buckskin pouch, its leather soft and worn. With an almost reverent gesture, he placed it gently, silently, on the keys, directly in front of her trembling fingers. The soft, rustling clink of a few dried leaves was audible in the sudden stillness. Tobacco, a sacred offering. He then turned, as silently and gracefully as he had arrived, and without a backward glance, stepped back into the raging blizzard. The white chaos seemed to swallow him whole, and he vanished as quickly and mysteriously as he had appeared. The heavy saloon doors swung shut with a gentle thud, leaving behind only the cold draft that feathered over Eleanor's skin, the lingering scent of snow and the wild, and an undeniable aura of the profound. Eleanor stared at the small pouch of tobacco, its earthy scent now distinct amidst the stale air. Her hands remained suspended above the keys, the final notes of the Comanche melody dying on her lips, fading into the tense silence. Silas, finally unfrozen from his stupor, let out a shaky breath, running a hand over his bald head. Calhoun in the corner shifted, a low, guttural grumble escaping his lips, but he said nothing, his eyes wide and fixed on the piano, on the tobacco, on Eleanor, with an uncharacteristic, almost childlike fear. The tobacco lay there, a silent, powerful testament to a connection neither understood, but both in their own ways felt. The blizzard outside seemed to intensify its furious assault, as if the land itself was holding its breath, waiting for the consequences of this strange midnight encounter. Eleanor knew with a certainty that settled deep in her bones that her carefully guarded past had just collided, irrevocably, with her precarious present. The first tendrils of dawn, pale and anemic, struggled to pierce the dense, swirling snow that still choked Redemption Creek. Inside the lucky spur, a profound silence had settled, far heavier than the usual morning quiet. Eleanor sat at the piano, the small buckskin pouch still resting on the keys, its presence a stark, undeniable reality in the dim light. She hadn't slept, couldn't. The image of the silent warrior, scarred wolf, for she knew instinctively it was him, a name whispered in long-forgotten stories from her youth, and the simple, profound gesture of the tobacco, replayed endlessly in her mind. It was a bridge from a life she'd buried, a life as morning star the white girl raised among the people. Silas, moving with unusual quietness, brewed coffee, the rich aroma doing little to cut through the tension. Calhoun, after a fitful, whiskey-soaked doze in his corner, finally stirred, rubbing a hand across his bristly jaw, his eyes, bleary and bloodshot, fixed on Eleanor, then on the pouch. "What in the devil was that all about, Eleanor?" he rasped, his voice rough with sleep and suspicion. "An Injun in my saloon at midnight, and you playin' that noise." His usual bluster was tempered by a palpable unease, a fear of the unknown that even his drunken bravado couldn't fully mask. Eleanor turned, her gaze steady, though a tremor ran through her. "It was a melody, Calhoun, and he left an offering." She picked up the pouch, the soft leather surprisingly warm against her fingertips. She didn't offer an explanation, knowing it would be futile. How could she explain the intricate language of respect, of shared history, to a man who saw only Injuns? Silas placed a steaming mug of coffee beside her. His eyes, usually shrewd, now held a deep concern. "An offering, eh? That ain't common. Not round here." He glanced towards the doors as if expecting the warrior to materialize again. "What do you make of it, Eleanor? You always kept quiet about your past." The unspoken words hung in the air, her rumored time with the tribes. Eleanor took a sip of the bitter coffee, its warmth a small comfort against the chill inside her. "It means something significant, Silas. Tobacco is sacred. It's a sign of respect, a recognition, or perhaps a warning." The last word, a whisper, seemed to solidify the swirling anxieties in her mind. The day that followed was a slow, grinding affair. The blizzard eventually retreated, leaving behind a world muffled in pristine, unforgiving white. Yet the air in Redemption Creek remained thick with unspoken questions. News of the midnight visitor spread like wildfire, carried by the few who braved the snowdrifts. By midday the saloon was buzzing, not with cheer but with a low hum of speculation and fear. Eleanor found herself the reluctant center of attention, her playing eyed with new suspicion. Some whispered about Injun magic, others about sympathizers. Calhoun, now fully awake and emboldened by the growing crowd, voiced the general sentiment. "She's too cozy with them, I tell you. Heard stories. Always been unnatural." The whispers escalated into outright accusations by nightfall. The town, already on edge due to a series of recent cattle rustlings and land disputes, saw the warrior's visit as an ill omen. Local ranchers, their faces grim and weather-beaten, spoke of a rising tide of unrest from the Comanche camps. They spoke of Elias Thorne, a ruthless cattle baron who had recently arrived in the territory, buying up vast tracts of land and pushing west, closer and closer to the ancestral hunting grounds of the Comanche. Thorne's presence had already inflamed tensions, his men notorious for their harsh methods and disregard for existing claims, both white and native. Eleanor, enduring the stares and the hushed conversations, felt a tightening in her gut. She understood the fear, the prejudice, but she also understood the Comanche. They were not simply savages, as the townsfolk depicted them. They were a people fighting for their land, their traditions, their very survival. Scarred Wolf's presence, the tobacco, it wasn't an act of aggression. It was something deeper, a communication she felt compelled to decipher. Later that evening, as the saloon began to empty again, a rider burst through the doors, caked in snow and frantic. They hit the Miller Ranch, burned it to the ground, took the livestock. The man, a young cowboy named Billy, gasped, pointing a trembling finger west. "Saw tracks, Comanche tracks." A wave of righteous fury swept through the saloon. Men grabbed their rifles, their eyes blazing with a mixture of fear and vengeance. "It's them! That Injun Eleanor was playing for," Calhoun roared, his face contorted with rage, pointing at her. "She's one of them! A spy!" Silas stepped in front of Eleanor, his old eyes hard. "Hold on, Calhoun, ain't no proof she had anything to do with it." "Proof?" Calhoun scoffed, gesturing wildly. "She plays their music, they show up, and then a ranch gets burned? It's too neat, Silas." Others in the saloon murmured in agreement, their mistrust of Eleanor now fully ignited. Eleanor, though shaken, remained outwardly calm. She knew this was coming. The escalating conflict, the fear-mongering, it was a cycle she'd witnessed before. "The Miller Ranch is close to Thorne's land," she stated, her voice clear despite the tremor in her hands. Perhaps it wasn't the Comanche. Perhaps it was Thorne trying to push them out, to provoke a response. Her words were met with angry shouts. "Don't be talking nonsense, woman. It was Injuns. Always is." A posse quickly formed, led by Calhoun and a few other hot-headed ranchers, fueled by whiskey and a thirst for retribution. They planned to ride out at first light, not just to track the rustlers, but to confront the Comanche encampments rumored to be in the foothills. As they stormed out, their boots crunching on the saloon floor, Eleanor felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter air. This impulsive act of vengeance would only lead to more bloodshed, more loss. It was a vicious cycle she knew too well. As the last of the posse disappeared into the still falling snow, Silas turned to Eleanor, his face etched with worry. "You were right, Eleanor. That tobacco, it wasn't just an offering, was it? It was a warning." Eleanor clutched the small pouch, its weight in her hand feeling immense, prophetic. "A warning, Silas, of the storm to come, and it's here." She looked towards the west, towards the dark, brooding foothills where the Comanche held their last stand. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that her unique connection, her dual heritage, was no longer a secret to be kept, but a burden she would have to carry, perhaps even weaponize, if anyone was to survive the coming conflict. The melody she had played at midnight was not just a song, it was an unwitting plea, a desperate call answered in the most unexpected and dangerous way. She had to understand Scarred Wolf's message before it was too late for Redemption Creek and for everyone in it. Her past was no longer buried, it was demanding to be heard. The air the next morning was still, the heavy silence of fresh snow replacing the blizzard's roar. The posse, fueled by vengeance and the biting cold, had ridden out before dawn, their shouts echoing eerily in the muffled landscape. Eleanor watched them go from the saloon's frosted window, a knot of dread tightening in her stomach. Their recklessness, born of fear and ignorance, felt like a fuse lit on a powder keg. She knew the Comanche, knew their pride and their desperation. This was not a conflict that could be solved with hot lead and blind rage. Silas, ever practical, was boarding up a shattered window, likely broken by an errant rock kicked up by one of the departing horses. "Foolishness," he muttered, more to himself than to Eleanor. "Riding blind into Injun country in this weather. They'll be lucky if the cold don't get 'em before any arrow does." He glanced at Eleanor, his gaze softening. "You got a mind to go after 'em, girl. Try to talk some sense into 'em." Eleanor shook her head, though the thought had indeed crossed her mind. "It's too late for talk, Silas. Not with that mob. They'll only see what they want to see. Besides," she gestured vaguely west, "I wouldn't even know where to start looking for Scarred Wolf's people, not without a guide." She looked at the buckskin pouch still clutched in her hand. "But I have to understand why he came, why he left this." Later that morning, as the sun began to cast long blue shadows across the snow, Eleanor decided to clear her head. She bundled herself in a thick wool coat and ventured outside, the crisp air biting at her cheeks. The town was eerily quiet, the snow absorbing all sound. Her boots crunched rhythmically as she walked, a solitary figure in a world of white. She found herself drifting towards the edge of town, where the sprawling plains began, stretching endlessly towards the distant, hazy foothills. It was there, partially obscured by a stand of snow-laden pines, that she saw him. Scarred Wolf. He stood perfectly still, his buffalo hide blending seamlessly with the muted landscape, his form almost indistinguishable from the gnarled tree trunks. He watched her approach, his dark eyes unblinking, betraying no emotion. Eleanor felt no fear, only a strange sense of inevitability. She stopped a respectful distance away, the cold air stinging her exposed skin. She held up the buckskin pouch. "Tobacco," she said, her voice a little hoarse in the cold. "An offering." Scarred Wolf's gaze moved from the pouch to her face, then to the piano almost 100 yards away, dimly visible through the falling snow. "The song," he rumbled, his voice low and gravelly, like stones shifting in a dry riverbed. "It is the song of the Morning Star. My grandmother sang it." Eleanor felt a sudden, profound jolt. Morning Star, her childhood name, the name only her Comanche family had used. "You know it," she whispered. "You knew who I was." He nodded, a barely perceptible movement. "We have heard of the white woman who plays the spirit songs. The stories tell of a child, lost, then found by our people, cherished." His eyes held a flicker of something ancient, something that spoke of memory and loss. "When I heard the song, it was as if the spirit spoke." "Why did you leave the tobacco?" she pressed, her breath pluming in the frigid air. He looked towards the west, his gaze distant, troubled. "A warning, a plea. The firemaker has come. Thorn. He burns our hunting grounds. He slaughters the buffalo. He seeks to break us. The young warriors, their hearts are full of fire. They seek justice. They raided the white man's cattle, yes, but they did not burn the ranch. That was the firemaker's doing. To blame us, to make the white man bring war." Eleanor felt a cold dread spread through her. Thorn, the ruthless cattle baron. It made sense. A false flag to incite conflict, to drive the Comanche from their lands. "The posse has gone after your people," she told him, her voice urgent. "They believe you burned the ranch. They seek vengeance." Scarred Wolf's jaw tightened. "I know. I saw them ride. Foolish men. They will find only death if they ride unprepared into the mountains." He paused, his eyes sweeping over her, a flicker of something she couldn't quite decipher. "You carry the spirit of two peoples, Morning Star. You understand the rage, the fear. You understand the land. This is why I came to you." "What do you want?" she asked, her breath catching in her throat. "My people are trapped. Thorn's men block the southern pass. forcing us into the high, dangerous, snow-covered trails. The posse will come from the east. We need a path, a message, a voice that can speak for peace or at least for understanding. He held her gaze, his expression unyielding. You are that voice, your song, your name. They speak of a connection that others do not see. Eleanor looked out at the vast, desolate landscape. She was a saloon pianist, a woman trying to forget a painful past. Now she was being asked to become a bridge, a messenger, in a war that threatened to consume everyone. The sheer weight of his request settled heavily on her shoulders. It's too dangerous, Scarred Wolf. The townsfolk, and they despise your people. They would never listen to me, not if I spoke for you. They already suspect me. They suspect you because you are different. But your difference is your strength now, he countered, his voice steady. My people respect the morning star. We respect those who walk between worlds. This war will consume both of our peoples, if no one steps forward. He took a deep breath, the vapor clouding around his face. There is a hidden pass high in the mountains. Dangerous, but it would bypass both Thorn's men and the posse. My people need to know of it, and someone must try to intercept the white men, to tell them the truth before blood is spilled uselessly. Eleanor stared at him, torn. The memory of her Comanche foster family, their faces blurred by time, flashed through her mind. The warmth of the teepee, the lessons learned under the vast, star-strewn sky. Then the brutal raid that had shattered her world, the reason she had fled. The fear was real, the danger immense. But the alternative, a bloodbath, a futile war, was unbearable. The pass, she finally said, her voice barely a whisper. Show me, and I will try to intercept them. I don't know if I can make them listen, but I will try. A flicker of something, relief, grim determination, crossed Scarred Wolf's face. Meet me at the old sentinel pine by the river's bend when the moon is at its highest point tonight. Do not tell anyone. The path we take must be unseen. He turned as silently as before and melted back into the snow-laden pines, leaving Eleanor alone amidst the vast, chilling silence of the winter morning. She looked at the buckskin pouch in her hand, then towards the distant mountains. Her carefully constructed life in Redemption Creek, her anonymity was shattered. The past had returned, not as a haunting memory, but as a living, breathing demand, drawing her into the heart of a conflict she could no longer avoid. She was no longer just Eleanor Vance, saloon pianist. She was Morning Star, a woman caught between two worlds, with the fate of both hanging precariously in the balance. The moon, a cold, indifferent eye, cast an icy luminescence over the snow-covered landscape as Eleanor made her way to the old sentinel pine. The biting wind had picked up again, whipping loose snow into ghostly spirals, making her progress slow and arduous. Every crunch of her boots on the frozen ground seemed amplified in the profound silence of the night. She wore her warmest coat, thick gloves and a woolen scarf wrapped tightly around her face, but the cold still found its way to her bones. Fear was a constant companion now, a cold knot in her stomach, yet beneath it thrummed a strange sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. This was more than just survival. It was a desperate gamble for peace. Scarred Wolf was there, a shadow among shadows, his silhouette merging with the gnarled branches of the ancient tree. He was already mounted on a sturdy, unshod pony, its breath pluming white in the moonlight. Another pony, saddled and ready, stood beside him, patiently pawing at the snow. His face, when he looked at her, was grim, his eyes reflecting the silver gleam of the moon. You came, he stated, not as a question but as a simple acknowledgement. I did, Eleanor replied, her voice steady despite the apprehension. She mounted the second pony, adjusting her grip on the reins. The animal was sure-footed, a mountain pony, clearly accustomed to such treacherous terrain. Show me the way. They rode in silence, a strange pair against the stark white expanse of the night. Scarred Wolf led them away from the main trails, deeper into the foothills, towards paths Eleanor had only vaguely heard whispers about, ancient Comanche routes, known only to a few. The ascent was brutal, the ponies strained, their hooves finding purchase on icy inclines. The air grew thinner, colder, stinging Eleanor's lungs with every breath. They navigated narrow ravines, their shadows stretching long and distorted in the moonlight, and climbed steep, treacherous slopes where a single misstep could send them plunging into the darkness below. As they ascended, Scarred Wolf occasionally pointed out landmarks with a silent gesture, a uniquely shaped rock formation, a cluster of ancient, wind-battered trees, a hidden spring whose water still gurgled beneath. a thin sheet of ice. He spoke rarely, but when he did, his words were precise, offering warnings about unseen crevasses or treacherous patches of ice. Eleanor absorbed it all, her Comanche upbringing kicking in, guiding her senses, sharpening her instincts. She recalled lessons from her youth, how to read the snow, the wind, the subtle signs of the land. Hours passed, stretching into an eternity of cold and effort. Finally, as the first faint hint of pre-dawn grey appeared on the eastern horizon, Scarred Wolf reined in his pony. They were high above Redemption Creek, which was now a distant scatter of faint lights below. Before them stretched a narrow, winding pass, almost invisible from below, leading deeper into the mountains. "This is it," he said, his voice quiet. "The hidden way. It will lead my people through, safe from Thorn's men, safe from the white men's rifles, if they hurry." Eleanor looked down, her heart sinking. She could see them in the distance, a faint smudge of movement, the posse pushing forward, their eagerness to find Comanche tracks, leading them straight towards the traditional Comanche lands, and likely towards a bloody confrontation. "The posse," she murmured, pointing. "They're still pushing towards the usual hunting grounds. They'll be trapped. Your people will be trapped too if they collide." Scarred Wolf's gaze was grim. "They are driven by fear, by lies. They will not listen to me." His eyes, however, then turned to Eleanor, a flicker of something almost hopeful in their depths. "But perhaps they will listen to the morning star, to a white woman who knows this land, who knows our ways." Eleanor knew he was right. Her chances were slim, but she was their only chance. "I'll try to head them off, to tell them the truth about Thorn, about the hidden pass." She took a deep breath, the cold air burning her lungs. "But you must go to your people, tell them, guide them through this pass as quickly as possible. Time is against us." Scarred Wolf nodded, a single decisive movement. "May the spirits guide your tongue, Morning Star, and may your feet be swift." Without another word, he turned his pony and vanished into the snow-laden shadows of the hidden pass, a silent, powerful figure disappearing into the vastness of the mountains. Eleanor was alone. She turned her pony east, towards the distant, struggling lights of the posse. The sun was now beginning to break the horizon, painting the sky in harsh hues of orange and purple. She spurred the pony forward, urging it down the treacherous slopes, a desperate ride against time. The terrain was unforgiving, but she pushed herself, remembering the faces of her Comanche family, remembering the kindness they had shown her, and the fear in Silas's eyes. She had to try. Hours later, the sun fully up and glimmers of sweat beading on her forehead despite the cold, she saw them, the posse, a small dark stain against the endless white. They were moving slower now, the extreme cold and the difficulty of the terrain taking their toll. Exhaustion was evident in their slumped shoulders and the heavy trudge of their horses. She saw Calhoun at the head, his breath steaming in the frigid air, his rifle clutched tight. "Hold, stop!" Eleanor's voice, hoarse from exertion and the cold, carried surprisingly far in the still air. She rode up to them, reining in her pony sharply, its flanks heaving. The men turned, their faces a mixture of surprise and suspicion. "Eleanor, what in blazes are you doing out here?" Calhoun snarled, his eyes narrowed. "Were you riding with them devils?" "No, I was riding to warn you." Eleanor gasped, her chest aching. She slid off her pony, her legs stiff and trembling. "You're making a terrible mistake. The Comanche didn't burn the Miller Ranch, it was Thorn. He's trying to incite a war, to drive them off their land." A chorus of angry shouts erupted. "Lies! Injun lies! She's one of them, I tell you." "Listen to me," Eleanor pleaded, her voice rising, infused with an uncharacteristic force. "I know this land. I know the Comanche. They have a hidden pass, a way through the mountains that avoids both Thorn's men and this trail. They are trying to flee, not fight. If you continue this way, you will only find their warriors, desperate and ready to defend their homes. You'll be walking into a trap, a slaughter for nothing." Calhoun, his face red with fury, raised his rifle. "Silence, woman. You're spouting Injun talk. We got a ranch burned and livestock stolen, and we're gonna get vengeance." "Vengeance for a lie," Eleanor retorted, unwavering, staring him down. "Thorn wants this war. He wants you to kill them so he can take their land without a fight. Think, man, why would the Comanche burn a ranch that far south, then leave tracks pointing directly at their camps, knowing you would follow? It's too convenient." She gestured back towards the hidden pass, a vague line against the distant mountains. "They are moving. They are trying to find peace. But if you push them, they will fight to the last man." "And many of you will die for a lie?" Some of the men exchanged uneasy glances. The exhaustion, the bitter cold, and the sheer difficulty of their journey had already begun to chip away at their initial bravado. Her words, though shocking, carried a ring of truth, unsettling their convictions. The uncharacteristic cold logic she presented, combined with the extreme effort she had clearly made to reach them, began to sow seeds of doubt. "How do you know this, Eleanor?" One rancher, a quieter, more thoughtful man named Jeb, asked, his voice hesitant. Eleanor met his gaze. "Because I know the Comanche. I lived among them as a child. I am Eleanor Vance, the saloon pianist, but I was also called Morning Star. And I tell you, this path leads to death, not justice." Her admission hung heavy in the frigid air, silencing the remaining protests. The truth of her past, long guarded, was now her desperate plea. The choice was theirs, blind vengeance or a chance at a different truth. The silence that followed Eleanor's confession hung heavy, broken only by the snorting of horses and the biting wind. The men of the posse, their faces etched with exhaustion and suspicion, stared at her, then at each other. Her words, "I was also called Morning Star," had landed with the force of a physical blow. Calhoun, still clutching his rifle, lowered it slowly, his jaw slack with disbelief. Eleanor Vance, the quiet pianist, the woman whose past was a persistent but unconfirmed rumor, had just laid bare the truth of her dual life. Jeb, the thoughtful rancher, was the first to speak, his voice hesitant. "Morning Star, you mean you lived with them? Really lived with the Comanche?" Eleanor nodded, meeting his gaze directly. "From the age of 5, after my family's wagon was attacked. They took me in, raised me. I know their language, their ways, and I know when they are being provoked, and when they are fighting for their very survival." She gestured towards the west, where the hidden pass now seemed little more than a jagged line against the rising sun. "Scarred Wolf, one of their warriors, came to me last night. He told me Thorn burned the Miller Ranch to turn you against them. He told me his people are trying to escape through a dangerous hidden mountain pass to avoid this conflict." A ripple of murmurs went through the posse. The idea of Thorn's treachery, though unsettling, resonated with their existing distrust of the land baron. He had already made many enemies with his ruthless tactics. The thought that they might be walking into a bloody, pointless battle, manipulated by Thorn, was a bitter pill to swallow. Calhoun, though still bristling with ingrained prejudice, was visibly shaken. Thorn, that snake, always thought he was too slick. His gaze drifted from Eleanor to the distant mountains, a flicker of doubt in his eyes. The thirst for vengeance was still there, but now it was tinged with a new, unwelcome uncertainty. "Think about it," Eleanor urged, pressing her advantage. "Why would they burn a ranch and leave such obvious tracks? It's not their way. They are strategists. And why would Scarred Wolf come to me, a white woman, and risk everything to give me this warning if not for peace?" She held up the buckskin pouch of tobacco. "This isn't a threat. It's an offering of peace, a plea for understanding." The men looked at the pouch, then at the vast, unforgiving landscape around them, the extreme cold, their dwindling supplies, the sheer futility of continuing on a path that might be a lie. It all weighed heavily. To turn back would be humiliating, but to press on into a potentially deadly ambush, manipulated by a man like Thorn, was an even more unpalatable prospect. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Jeb spoke again, his voice firm. "She speaks sense, boys. If Thorn is behind this, then we're playing his game, spilling our blood for his land grabs. We came out here for justice, not to be pawns." He looked directly at Calhoun. "We got no love for Injuns, but we got even less for being played for fools." Calhoun swore a low, frustrated curse, but he slowly holstered his rifle. The bravado had finally drained from him, replaced by a grudging, resentful acceptance of the logic. "All right," he grumbled, his voice raw. "We turn back. But if this is another Injun trick, Eleanor, you'll answer for it." Eleanor felt a wave of profound relief wash over her, so strong it almost buckled her knees. "It's no trick, Calhoun. It's the truth. Go back to Redemption Creek, tell Silas, tell everyone, and be ready. Thorn won't stop. This isn't over." With a mixture of weary resignation and simmering resentment, the posse turned their horses around, beginning the long, arduous journey back to Redemption Creek. They rode in a heavy silence, the previous bravado replaced by a brooding thoughtfulness. Eleanor watched them go, her heart still pounding, then turned her pony to follow, a short distance behind. As the sun climbed higher, casting the mountains in a golden glow, Eleanor looked back towards the hidden pass, a faint opening in the vast wilderness. She thought of Scarred Wolf, leading his people through the perilous snows, trusting her, a woman from the other world, to deliver his message. And she thought of Redemption Creek, a town built on prejudice and fear, now facing a truth it had long ignored. The journey back was a grueling one, but as they finally descended into the valley, the familiar sight of the town offered a fragile sense of hope. The Lucky Spur Saloon loomed, its lights just beginning to flicker on in the early evening. Eleanor knew the battle was far from over. Thorne would retaliate, and the tensions between the white settlers and the Comanche would remain volatile. But for now, a single act of understanding born of a midnight melody and a silent offering of tobacco had averted a bloody conflict. Eleanor rode into Redemption Creek not as just the saloon pianist, but as Eleanor Vance, Morning Star, the woman who had walked between two worlds and against all odds brought a glimmer of truth to a town shrouded in lies. Her past was no longer a secret burden, but a vital part of who she was, a bridge that might lead to a fragile, hard-won peace in the untamed Wild West. The quiet harmony of a Comanche melody, played at midnight, had echoed through the vast wilderness, bringing a moment of clarity to the escalating cacophony of fear and conflict, and setting a new, uncertain path for everyone in Redemption Creek.